Jews. The massive worldwide wanderings of the Jews began with the conquest of Palestine and the destruction of Jerusalem by the armies of the Roman Empire in 70 A.D. Jews had lived outside of Israel before then, in Greece and in Iraq, for example, centuries before Christ. But now began the era of the diaspora, their mass dispersion across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and eventually the Western Hemisphere. Jews were for centuries not only scattered generally, but separated from each other in different nations, and separated from the life of the people around them in each country. Strong religious convictions among the Jews inhibited their assimilation into Christian European society or the Islamic world, and discriminatory restrictions kept them from becoming integrated. While the Jews of Europe became numerically and culturally the dominant portion of world Jewry, there were major Jewish communities scattered across North Africa and as far across Asia Minor as Iraq. Indeed, Iraq, Algeria, and Morocco at one time each had Jewish populations larger than those ever living in Greece, Holland, or Yugoslavia. Over the 18 centuries between the end of ancient Israel and the emergence of modern Israel, the Jews in various parts of the world to some extent slowly assimilated, both culturally and biologically, to their respective surrounding societies. In physical appearance, Middle Eastern and North African Jews looked more like Arabs than like European Jews. Of the Jews who lived among the Berbers in Morocco, it was said that they spoke Berber, looked like Berbers, and were Berbers in everything except their religion. In short, differences in physical appearance between Jews of different lands became marked. In many of the Arab lands, the Jews developed a Judeo-Arabic language that was their dominant colloquial speech by the 18th century. Persian was spoken by Jews in Iran and Afghanistan. Sephardic Jews from the Iberian Peninsula spoke Ladino, a form of medieval Spanish with an admixture of Hebrew, which tended to be replaced by Judeo-Arabic after many of them migrated to North Africa and the Middle East following persecutions in Spain and Portugal. The Ashkenazic Jews in the rest of Europe developed the colloquial language Yiddish, an intricate mixture of several languages, primarily of German, Hebrew, and Slavic. The extent to which Jews acquired the culture of the surrounding society varied with the extent to which the surrounding society accepted them on that basis. In Eastern Europe, where anti-Semitism was particularly virulent, Jews lived for centuries without making Russian, Polish, or Lithuanian their mother tongue. Conversely, after the legal emancipation of Jews in Hungary, they became culturally Hungarian. Similarly, Iraqi Jews, who were at one time citizens with equal rights, were also the most assimilated Jews in the Arab world. In short, the Jews of the diaspora became very much differentiated, not only by nationality, but ethnically and religiously within given nations. Sephardic Jews seldom married Ashkenazic Jews, whether in Europe, the United States, or Israel. Even among the small Jewish communities in India, intermarriage is rare between ethnically different Jews. The reuniting of Jews from around the world in modern Israel has not eliminated these many cultural and racial differences from the centuries of the diaspora, but has in fact made their contrasts more painfully apparent and pitted them against each other politically. The achievement of a national unity, despite these internal diversities, has been one of many remarkable aspects of Israel. From the early centuries of the diaspora, Jews were predominantly artisans and middlemen, peddlers, merchants, and moneylenders, and most were poor. In the days of the Roman Empire, Jewish peddlers often followed in the wake of the Roman legions, selling merchandise. As the empire declined, Jews also moved among the barbarians, introducing them to the products and ideas of the civilized world. As learning declined in Europe, the Jews held on to more of it than many Christians, causing the latter to develop more respect for Jews, whose knowledge was often useful to them. At the same time, this prestige of the Jews among the masses was resented by church officials, who used their influence against the Jews. By and large, however, the treatment of the Jews in the first 1,000 years of the Christian era was not as bad as it was to become in later centuries. With the rising religious fervor of Christians during the era of the Crusades, Jews became targets for wild mobs who sometimes slaughtered them by the thousands. Jews lived a precarious existence throughout Europe, often paying for protection by the ruling powers, protection which was sometimes given and sometimes withheld, depending upon the disposition of the sovereigns and the political expediency of sacrificing the Jews as scapegoats for general frustrations and discontents among the populace. Very similar patterns existed across North Africa and the Middle East. The triumph of Islam in the region often meant either forced conversion of Jews on pain of death, or else their subjugation and deliberate humiliation, as in Yemen, where an 1806 decree imposed upon Jews the task of removing the carcasses of animals from the streets and cleaning the latrines, and where a 1905 decree required Jews to step off the sidewalk into the gutter whenever a Muslim walked past. Jews lived separately, first voluntarily and later by official compulsion. For example, a Polish edict in 1266 said, "We command that the Jews dwelling in this province of Gazan shall not live among the Christians, but shall have their houses near or next to one another in some sequestered part of the state or town, so that their dwelling place shall be separated from the common dwelling places of the Christians by a hedge, a wall, or a ditch." Similar edicts were issued in many parts of Europe and the Middle East. The word ghetto originated in the Middle Ages to designate the segregated Jewish section of many European cities. Jewish ghettos were often walled off and had gates that were locked at night, when Jews were forbidden to be abroad among the Christians. Jews were restricted as to the kinds of occupations they were allowed to engage in, as well as where they were allowed to live. Jews had many artisan skills, but were usually not admitted to the guilds which had monopolies of practicing such skills in many cities and towns. In the early centuries A.D., many Jews were farmers and landowners, but in most countries they were forced out of these occupations by various restrictions and prohibitions. Jews found, or created, such economic roles as they could. They became middlemen of one sort or another throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Petty peddlers, junk dealers, pawnbrokers, and a fortunate few became substantial merchants and bankers. Many Jews practiced their artisan skills on the fringes or in the interstices of these societies. Their skills, work capacity, and frugality made Jews valuable additions to many economies, and the money they lent made them welcome by rulers and the nobility, who were often in need of loans to sustain their wars or other extravagances. But the peasants and the poor of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, like their counterparts in Southeast Asia, hated foreign middlemen who prospered in their midst and were therefore presumed to prosper at their expense. Yet, as with the overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia, mass expulsions of Jews often led to higher interest rates and worse economic conditions, so that Jews were often later allowed, or invited, back to countries from which they had been expelled. Confiscatory taxation, mass expulsions, orgies of mob violence, looting, and systematic destruction of property all took their toll on the Jews, both economically and psychologically. Jews became poor in many countries where they had once prospered. They remained strangers and prey to local bullies in countries where they had lived for centuries, sometimes longer than the majority of the inhabitants who were considered natives. Timidity, self-consciousness, suspicion of their neighbors became characteristic of the ghetto Jew. They walked with a bent posture of humility and fear, the ghetto crouch. Nor was this reaction limited to European Jews. In Yemen as well, Jews had learned the art of accepting insults with self-effacement, and Yemenite Jews themselves recognized that humility and timidness were basic features of their character. Conditions varied unpredictably from time to time and from place to place, adding to the uncertainties of the Jews and leading to refugee movements from country to country as conditions became intolerable in one place or more humane policies made others more attractive. Much of the anti-Semitic policies or mob violence in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East expressed religious differences, but the pattern was very similar to the fate of the Chinese in Southeast Asia, where religious differences were seldom major considerations. Moreover, even in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, there were many worldly and especially economic gains to be made by using Jews as scapegoats, killing people to whom money was owed, restricting competitors, and confiscating the property of an unpopular people, either piecemeal by discriminatory taxation or all at once in sporadic edicts. In short, religious rhetoric did not imply religious bigotry as the prime motivating force, especially among ringleaders of mobs or rulers of nations. Spain. Jews lived and prospered in Spain for centuries before the founding of the Visigoths kingdom in 412 A.D., or the conversion of the Visigoths to Roman Catholicism in 589 A.D. As in much of the rest of Europe during this period, the Jews of Spain lived with a certain amount of toleration and even respect from the non-Jewish population. For centuries, itinerant Jewish peddlers spread knowledge of a wider social world among the insular peoples of various parts of Europe and created an interest in civilized life among the barbarian tribes that had spread across Europe with the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. By the time the Visigoths founded their kingdom in Spain, Jews were well established, influential, and wealthy there. They engaged in a wide range of activities, including the ownership of large estates and the holding of both civil and military offices. Although the Visigoths were initially very tolerant of religious differences, the conversion of their ruling monarch to Catholicism in 589 established strong church-state ties and began a policy of restrictions on Jews that developed into full-blown persecution under the later Visigoth kings, notably in the 7th century A.D. The motivation for these actions appeared to have been political rather than religious. Nevertheless, many Jews fled Spain under the later Visigoth kings. Ironically, the conquest of Spain by the Mohammedans in the 8th century A.D. restored freedom to the Spanish Jews and opened what had been called the Golden Age in their development. Not only did the Jews of Spain prosper, Spain itself became the wealthiest and most cultured nation in Europe. Jews became a conduit for the transmission of skills and scholarship, as well as goods, between the Muslim and the Christian worlds. The Jews continued their prosperity and prominence in high places after the restoration of Christian rule in Spain. While most Spanish Jews worked in such occupations as craftsmen, small businessmen, and moneylenders, some owned textile manufacturing businesses or were high-level administrators and tax collectors for the Spanish monarchy. Jews dominated the liberal professions in Spain. While protected by the monarchy, Jews were bitterly resented by the poor and the uneducated in Spain and were victims of sporadic riots in the 14th century. Spain, called Sepharad in Hebrew, was the home of the Sephardic Jews, who were in the cultural forefront of world Jewry, and quite conscious of that fact. For centuries after this golden age, many put the letters St after their names, for Sifrei Torah in Hebrew, or pure Sephardi. They continued to be called Sephardic Jews even after they settled in Holland, North Africa, the United States, or elsewhere. In the 15th century, Jews were caught in the midst of internal power struggles in Spain. Many were massacred in various Spanish cities, and eventually a royal decree was issued in 1492, expelling Jews from Spain and confiscating much of their property. Wealth confiscated from Jews helped finance the fateful voyages of Columbus that began that year. Many of the expelled Spanish Jews made their way to Holland, where there was religious freedom. The Spanish Jews who settled in Holland helped to make Amsterdam one of the world's great commercial ports, and came ultimately to own 1/4 of the shares in the Dutch East India Company. The Sephardic Jews who settled in Algeria became the acknowledged leaders of the Jewish community there, and leaders also of the commercial activities of the nation. Although the Spanish government had confiscated the wealth of the Sephardic Jews, they could not confiscate the skills and traits that created that wealth in the first place, and would create it again in many nations. Sephardic Jews retained their sense of ease, confidence, and superiority. The Sephardi looked down from on high upon the poor little Jew from the north, accustomed to misery and oppression, who cowered, made himself humble, and hugged the wall, who had always lived with doors and windows closed, shut up in the Judengassen, Jewish streets, in sullen isolation, who shunned all social contact, all friendship with the non-Jew, who always despised and unwanted, lived here and there as a veritable nomad, always ready to take off with his bundle and his wanderer's staff. After 10 centuries, these brothers in Israel had ceased to recognize each other. Their encounter did not take place without hurt. Footnote: Raphael Patai, The Vanished Worlds of Jewry. Ironically, they would meet again centuries later in Israel, and then it would be the northern European Jews who would be ascendant. Germany. Germany, where the Jews were to meet their greatest catastrophe in the Nazi Holocaust, was throughout most of its history one of the most tolerant European countries for Jews. The German states were not free of the persecutions and sporadic violence that marked Jewish life elsewhere in Europe, but these things were simply not as bad as they were in other parts of Europe. In the 11th century, when the First Crusades introduced massive violence against Jews, the Jews who lived along the Rhine were on such good terms with their German neighbors that they refused to believe the warnings sent by the Jews of France that danger threatened. Many German Jews therefore became part of the 10,000 Jews killed in Central Europe. Because Germany in Hebrew was Ashkenaz, the German Jews were called Ashkenazic Jews, and like the Sephardic Jews, they continued to carry this name with them as they settled, sometimes for centuries, in other nations of Europe or in the Western Hemisphere. Most of the Jews of Europe and of the world are Ashkenazic Jews. It was in Germany that Yiddish originated in the 12th century, and that Reform Judaism and Zionism later evolved. Frankfurt on Main became a center of world Jewish culture. Jews were sometimes invited to settle in German cities, and at other times massacred or expelled, and then invited back. Sometimes the German nobles protected them in their castles when the Crusaders came through in 1146, and sometimes the nobles turned on them. In the 17th and 18th centuries, there were court Jews who served kings and princes in various ways, but the prince's death, or even his whim, could abruptly end their careers and cost them all their fortune or even their lives. German Jews attempted to assimilate into German society by adopting the language, the dress, and even some outward religious customs of their Christian countrymen. Reform Judaism in Germany featured many outward similarities to Christian churches, such as stained glass windows, mixed choirs, and instrumental music, and calling the place of worship a temple instead of a synagogue. Such innovations made little headway in Eastern Europe, where the distinction between Jew and Gentile was too great to be affected by such gestures. Over the centuries, Jews in Germany rose to positions of affluence and influence, especially after the many small German states were unified into one country. By the end of the 19th century, there were nearly 600,000 Jews in Germany, a prosperous community, all German-speaking and German-feeling, with more than half of them in commerce, 1/5 in industry and trade, and about 6% in liberal professions and public service. Even the most religiously orthodox Jews considered themselves totally German. This remained true even after immigration to the United States. 19th century German Jewish immigrants to America typically settled among other Germans and took part in the general community life, while retaining their own religious institutions. This was not true of later immigrants from Eastern Europe, who lived lives very much apart from other Polish and Russian people, except for commercial transactions. American Jews were so pro-German, as late as World War I, as to bring on U.S. government prosecutions for voicing support for an enemy nation. Jews were a major part of the economic, scientific, and cultural life of Germany. They were disproportionately represented in the arts, the sciences, and the press, and even played a role in German politics. Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe sought a haven in Germany. Although Jews were only 1% of the German population, They became 10% of the doctors and dentists, 17% of the lawyers, and won 27% of the Nobel Prizes won by all Germans from 1901 to 1975. Social acceptance from other Germans accompanied these advances and achievements by Jews. In the 1920s, nearly half of all Jewish marriages in Germany were to Gentiles. Thousands of Jews converted to Christianity or simply withdrew from the Judaic religion and community. In short, Jews achieved some of their greatest economic prosperity, scientific and artistic achievements, and widespread social acceptance just on the eve of the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. Anti-Semitism in Germany reached fanatical levels among the small group of Nazis in the 1920s. When the general crisis and collapse of the Weimar Republic brought the Nazis to power in 1933, the stage was set for the greatest catastrophe ever to befall the Jews, or perhaps any other people in history, the cold-blooded murder of 6 million defenseless human beings for no other reason than simply being Jews. While this was the climactic disaster of Jewish history, it was also a repetition of a pattern that had appeared again and again in their history. Eastern Europe. Historically, Eastern Europe has lagged behind Western Europe in economic development and general cultural advancement. The Jews carried the economic skills and cultural development of Western Europe into Eastern Europe. In order to encourage this process, the Polish ruler, Boleslav, issued a charter in 1264 protecting the Jews in his domain. This made Poland an attractive refuge for many European Jews, not only from Germany and Central Europe, but also from as far away as Spain. Later rulers continued this policy in order to attract more Jews and gain the benefits their skills were bringing to Poland. By the 16th century, Jewish academies were flowering in Poland and other Slavic areas, where many Jews were living in self-governing communities. Polish Jews were in the vanguard of Ashkenazic Jewish cultural development. Economically, they were thriving as well. Jews could function on an equal footing with Christians. They controlled the international trade between Christian Europe and the East, and from the late 15th century with the Ottoman Empire, provided the nobility with clothing, dyes, and luxury items, financed kings, magnates, cities and businesses, managed mines and customs stations, and played a leading part in the periodic fairs which took place in several major cities. In the year 1600, there were about 500,000 Jews living in Poland, far more than in Western and Central Europe combined. The prosperity of the Polish Jews provoked resentment among the Polish peasant masses, especially bitter toward those Jews who acted as rent collectors for the Polish nobility and tax collectors for the Polish government. By the middle of the 17th century, popular hatred of Jews in Eastern Europe was expressed in periodic mass violence, a century and a half of almost uninterrupted massacres of Jews. Polish Jews also suffered economic, social, and cultural decline. When Poland was incorporated into the Russian Empire, Jewish residences were restricted to specific parts of Russia called the Pale of Settlement. Jews could not live beyond the Pale. Eastern European Jews were now worse off than the Jews of Western Europe, and were cut off from the life and culture of other Europeans. The Russian government attempted to assimilate the Jews by authoritarian measures. Orders to Jews to cut their beards, dress like Russians, teach Russian in their schools, and send their youths away for long years of military training, which included Russian non-kosher food and Russian religious practices. Evasions and repressions followed these policies until the middle of the 19th century, when Tsar Alexander II began to rescind many anti-Jewish policies. But the assassination of the Tsar in 1881 marked not merely the end of these policies, but the beginning of a new era of mass violence against Jews in Eastern Europe. The Russian police stood idly by as massive riots, pogroms, spread through Russia in 1881, killing several hundred Jews. The Russian government's response to these riots, and international indignation over them, was to force Jews to relocate from the smaller towns into the larger urban centers within the Pale. The impossible situation of Jews in Russia and in other parts of Eastern Europe provoked one of the greatest exoduses ever seen in history. In a period of 33 years, almost one-third of all the Jews in Eastern Europe left their homelands. Between three-quarters and four-fifths of the Russian Jewish immigrants went directly to the United States, and many other Jews found their way to America after stopping temporarily in other countries. While only about 1,500 Jews per year had left Tsarist Russia in the decade ending in 1880, more than 50,000 per year immigrated to the United States in the next decade, and this was doubled again in the following decade. In the early 20th century, nearly 100,000 Jews per year were leaving Russia for the United States alone. When Poland gained independence from Russia after World War I, its resurgent nationalism took the form of excluding Jews from many sectors in the economy where they had been working for centuries. The rise of Nazi anti-Semitism in neighboring Germany during the 1930s found its echo in Polish thoughts and deeds, including anti-Jewish boycotts and pogroms. After the Nazis conquered Poland, their anti-Semitic policies were well received by the Poles who cooperated. At the end of World War II, Poland was virtually without Jews. The United States. A long history of greater religious tolerance than in Europe made the United States especially attractive to persecuted Jews. Jews began arriving early in colonial America, Sephardic Jews who had wandered from country to country seeking refuge in the wake of the mass expulsions from Spain in 1492. In 1654, a small group of Jews from Brazil arrived on the Santa Catarina, sometimes known as the Jewish Mayflower. By the time of the Revolutionary War, there were about 2,000 Jews in the American colonies. These early Sephardic Jews were followed by German Jews in the 18th century. Then came the massive immigration of Eastern European Jews, beginning in the 1880s. Unlike the German Jews, who were spread out across America, Eastern European Jews concentrated in New York City. Of nearly 1.5 million Jews who entered the United States between 1881 and 1911, 70% settled in New York City. Their greatest concentration was on Manhattan's Lower East Side, where more than 500,000 Jews were packed into 1.5 square miles. About half of the Jewish families slept 3 or 4 to a room, and another quarter slept 5 or more to a room. Kitchens and parlors often served as bedrooms at night, and parts of an apartment often served as workplaces during the day for sweatshop labor, with its long hours and low pay. The streets below were also crowded with masses of pushcarts, peddlers, and customers, a packed throng through which a few wagons tried to force their way. In these streets, the crush and the stench were suffocating. The great bulk of the early immigrant Jews from Eastern Europe were manual laborers, but 2/3 were skilled workers. 1 out of 3 Jewish immigrant workers earned a living in New York's garment industry, where the workers were usually Eastern European Jews and the owners German Jews. Although the Jewish immigrants arrived in America with less money than most other immigrants, their rise to prosperity was unparalleled. Working long hours at low pay, they nevertheless saved money to start their own small businesses, often just a pushcart, or to send a child to college. While the Jews were initially destitute in financial terms, they brought with them not only specific skills, but a tradition of success and entrepreneurship, which could not be confiscated or eliminated, as the Russian and Polish governments had confiscated their wealth and eliminated most of their opportunities. The Jews began to rise again in the United States, first in skilled occupations and small businesses. Their children could then be kept in high school, and many began to enter the free municipal colleges of New York City. By 1916, Jews constituted 44% of the students at Hunter College and 73% of the students at City College. Even at Catholic Fordham University, 1/5 of the students were Jews. The Jewish educational advancement paid off in professional careers. For example, Jews constituted 8% of the population of Cleveland in 1938, but were 18% of that city's dentists, 21% of its doctors, and 23% of its lawyers. In New York, where Jews were about 1/4 of the population, they were 55% of the doctors, 64% of the dentists, and 65% of the lawyers. Anti-Semitism increased along with the growing population of Eastern European Jews, whose foreign ways, dress, and language repelled many Americans and greatly embarrassed the more acculturated German Jews. Barriers went up against Jews in general in various occupations, businesses, and industries, as well as in social settings such as clubs or hotels. Jews crowded into those sectors that were open to them and created their own industries. New York's garment industry was owned overwhelmingly by Jews. So was Hollywood's motion picture industry during the heyday of the great studios like MGM and Warner Brothers. But the Jews never dominated the huge American economy in any way approaching the domination of the overseas Chinese in the less developed Southeast Asian economies. By 1969, Jewish family income in the United States was 72% above the national average. More than one-fourth of all Nobel Prizes won by Americans had been won by Jewish Americans. While Israel was the historic Jewish homeland, there were more Jews in the United States than in Israel. Indeed, Israel itself owed much to the financial and political support of Jews in America.
Kaddish.